I built my career on precision and honesty. In the pharmaceutical world, bad data doesn't just mean lost money, it means lost lives. For 15 years at Horizon Pharmaceuticals, I'd grown alongside brilliant researchers dedicated to finding treatments for diseases most pharmaceutical giants ignored. Our team had become family, united by the mission of bringing hope to patients everyone else had forgotten. I still remember the day Dr. Raymond Chen burst into my office, his typically calm demeanor replaced with barely contained excitement. "Nathan, the Phase 2 results are incredible," he said, waving his tablet at me. "Neurogen is working better than we ever anticipated." As Director of Financial Compliance, my job was to make sure our reporting was accurate, that investors weren't being misled, and that FDA submissions reflected reality. But in that moment, watching Ray's eyes shine with the promise of helping thousands of patients with a previously untreatable neurological disorder, I was simply a human being sharing in a triumph of science. That night, Olivia and I celebrated my recent promotion over champagne. "To Horizon's breakthrough," my wife toasted, "and to my brilliant husband who keeps them honest." We clinked glasses in our modest dining room, the Boston skyline twinkling through our apartment window. Olivia, a high school counselor with an unerring moral compass, had always been proud of my work. When she suggested we invest more of our retirement savings in Horizon stock, I agreed without hesitation. I believed in our company, our mission, the integrity of our science. God, I was so naive. The first signs of trouble appeared so gradually I almost missed them. Dr. Chen announced his retirement due to, quote, heart issues just weeks after Neurogen's groundbreaking preliminary results. The timing seemed odd. This was his life's work coming to fruition, but health problems don't follow convenient schedules. His replacement, Dr. Marcus Blackwell, arrived with impeccable credentials and ambitious plans to fast-track Neurogen through the remaining trial phases. "The sooner we get this to market, the sooner patients benefit," he told the staff during his introduction. It was hard to argue with that logic. The first red flag was subtle, a pattern of adverse reactions missing from the summary reports. When I mentioned it to Marcus during our weekly review, his smile never wavered. "Different reporting standards, Nathan. We're streamlining for FDA submission." But something in his eyes hardened when he said it. I knew how to read financial statements the way doctors read lab results, and something was definitely abnormal. The research assistants who'd always come to me with questions started avoiding eye contact in the hallways. Meeting invitations that should have included me mysteriously excluded my name. One Friday evening, I stayed late to compare some raw patient data files with investor reports. What I found made my blood run cold. Severe side effects were being categorized as, quote, unrelated events. 3 patients had developed seizures during the trial. None had a history of epilepsy, yet these incidents were buried in footnotes as, quote, concurrent conditions. I printed the documents, locked them in my desk, and spent the weekend turning the problem over in my mind. When Monday came, I tried discussing my concerns with Sarah from clinical research. "You're being too technical, Nathan," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Marcus says we need to look at the big picture. Don't you want to help patients?" One by one, colleagues I'd worked with for years began treating me like a troublemaker. At home, I tried explaining my growing unease to Olivia. "Something's wrong with the Neurogen data," I said over dinner. "I think they're hiding serious side effects." She put down her fork. "Are you sure? That's a massive accusation, Nathan." "I know what I'm seeing," I replied. "The numbers never lie, even when people do." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the patients in those trials. People desperately hoping for relief, who had no idea what risks they might really be taking. Around 4 a.m. I drove back to the office, using the quiet early morning hours to dig deeper. What I found turned my suspicions into certainty. There, buried in the original trial documentation, was a patient death that had been attributed to, quote, disease progression in all the summary reports. But the timing and symptoms clearly suggested a drug reaction. I sat alone in my darkened office, the weight of the discovery pressing down on my chest. This wasn't just financial fraud. People's lives were at stake. I decided then that I needed to take my findings straight to the top. I scheduled a meeting with our CEO and board chair for Thursday morning, then spent the next 2 days meticulously documenting every discrepancy I'd found. Thursday arrived with a surreal normalcy. Colleagues nodding good morning, the usual coffee cart in the lobby, my family photos smiling from my desk. At 9:55, 5 minutes before my scheduled meeting with the executives, my phone rang. It was Marcy from HR asking me to come to her office instead. I knew then that something was terribly wrong. My security badge was deactivated before I even reached my office to collect my family photos. 15 years of dedication ended with a cardboard box and a security escort. As I walked through the lobby, I saw Sofia Rodriguez watching from a distance, her eyes wide with alarm. We both knew what was happening. I'd seen too much. In the HR conference room, Marcus sat alongside two attorneys from legal. Marcy, looking deeply uncomfortable, slid a document toward me. "Due to restructuring, your position has been eliminated," she said, as if reading from a script. "Horizon is offering you 18 months' salary as severance, along with continued health benefits." One of the attorneys pointed to the final pages. "The non-disclosure agreement is standard but comprehensive. You'd be prohibited from discussing any aspect of Horizon's clinical trials or financial reporting with outside parties." I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. "And if I don't sign?" I asked. Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then unfortunately, we can only offer the minimum 2 weeks notice required by law." My mind raced to our mortgage, Olivia's student loans from her master's program, the retirement savings we'd shifted into increasingly worthless Horizon stock. 18 months of salary would give us breathing room to figure out next steps. All I had to do was look the other way while a potentially dangerous drug went to market. "I'll need to review this with my attorney," I said, gathering the paperwork. The lawyers exchanged glances. "We'll need your decision by tomorrow," one said. "The offer expires at 5 p.m. I nodded, numb, and carried my sad little box of belongings to my car. My phone buzzed with a text as I sat in the parking garage, still trying to process what had happened. It was from Sophia. "Call me on my personal number, not from your work phone." As soon as I got home, I dialed her. She answered on the first ring, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're shredding documents from the early trial," she said. "And Marcus authorized IT to modify some of the electronic records. Nathan, they knew you were gathering evidence." That evening, Olivia and I sat at our kitchen table, the severance agreement between us like a ticking bomb. "They're buying your silence," she said flatly. "I know. What about the patients?" Her eyes, always her most expressive feature, were filled with the same moral certainty that had first attracted me to her in college. "We could use that money, Nathan. But could you live with yourself?" I knew the answer already. I called Elijah Williams, Olivia's cousin who worked for the FDA in their fraud investigation unit. "I need to talk to you," I said. "Not over the phone. It's about Neurogen." The next week was a blur. Elijah connected me with Amanda Taylor, an attorney specializing in pharmaceutical whistleblower cases. Her office was small but immaculate, her handshake firm. "They'll come after your professional reputation, your finances, even your marriage," Amanda warned. "Are you prepared for that?" Olivia squeezed my hand across the table. "We already lost our retirement when the company tanked our stock with false data," she said. "What's left to take but our integrity?" When I missed the severance agreement deadline, Horizon's response was swift and aggressive. Not only did they withdraw the offer, but their attorneys sent a threatening letter claiming I had, quote, "stolen confidential information," and was in breach of my employment contract. Then came the whisper campaign. Former colleagues suddenly remembered performance issues I'd never had, suggestions that I was disgruntled after being passed over for promotion. Having worked in pharmaceutical compliance for 15 years, I knew what we were up against. These companies had legal teams larger than some law firms, with virtually unlimited resources to crush individual whistleblowers. But I also knew I wasn't alone. Sophia continued feeding me information, risking her own position. Through Elijah, we carefully documented the pattern of data manipulation. Amanda filed our whistleblower complaint with both the FDA and the Securities and Exchange Commission, laying out the evidence of fraud in meticulous detail. The scariest part was the waiting, the months of unemployment, the dwindling savings, the growing legal bills. Olivia picked up extra counseling hours, and I did some consulting work under the table for former colleagues who still believed in me. Each night, we'd sit on our balcony, looking out at the Boston skyline, reminding ourselves why we'd chosen this difficult path. Have you ever faced a moment when standing for the truth cost you everything? Times when I wondered if I'd made the right choice came in waves, especially at 3 a.m., when doubts grow louder than reason. If you're listening to this and nodding because you've been there, torn between what's easy and what's right, know that you're not alone in that struggle. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to hear what happened next to me and the patients whose lives hung in the balance. 6 months after my termination, I received an anonymous email. The subject line read simply, "Why you need to keep fighting." Inside was a video link, and the message, "This is why you can't stay silent." The video showed a teenage girl in a hospital bed, her body contorting with violent seizures. According to the attached clinical notes, she'd been taking Neurogen for 4 months, with excellent results for her primary condition before the seizures began. These seizures, identical to those I'd seen documented in the buried trial data, were completely absent from official reports. I forwarded everything to Amanda and Elijah, my hands shaking. Someone inside Horizon still had a conscience. That video changed everything. The FDA launched a surprise inspection of Horizon's research facilities based on our expanded complaint. Investigators seized computers and records before they could be further altered. 3 weeks later, in a move that shocked the pharmaceutical world, the FDA suspended all Neurogen trials pending a complete safety review. Horizon's stock plummeted, and the board called an emergency meeting. Then came the day I never expected. Dr. Raymond Chen emerged from his retirement, agreeing to testify about the pressure he'd faced to manipulate data, pressure he'd refused, resulting in his forced departure. With Ray's testimony alongside our evidence, federal prosecutors filed criminal charges against Marcus and 2 senior executives. I'll never forget watching Marcus being escorted from the Horizon building by federal agents. It provided no satisfaction, only sadness for the patients who'd been harmed, the researchers whose work had been corrupted, and a company whose genuine breakthrough had been tainted by greed. The class action lawsuits began almost immediately. Some patients who'd experienced severe side effects during the trials came forward, alleging their symptoms had been dismissed or attributed to other causes. Neurogen itself turned out to be effective, but required additional safeguards and monitoring that would have delayed approval, delays that Marcus hadn't been willing to accept in his rush for market dominance. Throughout the legal proceedings, I testified multiple times, to grand juries, in depositions, to FDA review panels. Each time, I simply told the truth about what I'd discovered and what had happened afterward. A year and a half after my termination, Marcus Blackwell and Horizon's former CEO were sentenced to federal prison for fraud. The reformed company, under new leadership, established an independent ethics board to oversee all clinical reporting. After the sentencing, Ray Chen approached me in the courthouse hallway. "I should have done what you did," he said quietly. "When they pushed me out, I should have fought. You came forward when it counted," I assured him. As we walked out into the bright Boston afternoon, Ray revealed that his heart condition had actually been stress-induced by his moral conflict. "I've been thinking," he said, "about creating an independent monitoring group to ensure clinical trial integrity across the industry. Would you be interested?" Today, 3 years later, our clinical research integrity project works with whistleblowers from pharmaceutical companies worldwide. Olivia and I never recovered financially from the ordeal. The legal fees ate through our savings, and while I eventually received a whistleblower award, much of it went to paying debts accumulated during the fight. We downsized to a smaller apartment, delayed our retirement plans, but some mornings, I receive emails from patients or their families, thanking me for helping ensure that Neurogen is now prescribed with proper safety protocols. Those messages are worth more than any retirement account. The hardest part wasn't losing my job or fighting a pharmaceutical giant. It was realizing that good people, my colleagues and friends, had been slowly corrupted by small compromises until major frauds seemed justified. The line between right and wrong doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes gradually until one day you find yourself on the wrong side without remembering when you crossed it. Sophia eventually left Horizon too, joining our integrity project. The anonymous email with the video, we later discovered, came from a young doctor in the clinical trials division who'd been struggling with her own ethical concerns. Looking back, I realize how many people it takes to either maintain or break a system of corruption. Each person who stays silent out of fear, each person who speaks up despite the consequences, they all determine which direction the moral compass will point. Integrity isn't just a personal value, it can save lives. If my story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to hear more stories of courage in the face of overwhelming pressure. What would you have done in my position? Sometimes I still wake up wondering if we could have done more, saved more patients from harm. Olivia reminds me that one person can't fix everything, but one person can refuse to be part of the problem, and that's where all positive change begins. Last month I ran into one of my former Horizon colleagues at a conference. He couldn't quite meet my eyes as he mumbled about difficult situations and, complex choices. I simply told him that when the choices seem too complex, it helps to ask yourself what you'd want the people treating your own family members to do. The math suddenly becomes very simple. Some people call me a hero for what I did. I don't see it that way. I was just an accountant who noticed that the numbers didn't add up and decided I couldn't pretend otherwise. There's nothing heroic about basic honesty. It should be our minimum standard, not our highest aspiration. But in a world where looking the other way often comes with financial rewards, perhaps the simple act of bearing witness to truth does require a kind of everyday courage we all possess, but don't always use. If you've stayed with me until the end of this story, I believe you're someone who values that kind of integrity. Our channel shares these stories because we believe in the power of truth to heal and transform. If you found meaning in my journey, please consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their own ethical struggles. After all, our individual choices, woven together, create the moral fabric of our society. Thank you for listening.